Okay, native rangeland, going. You notice I didn't close out that statement. I hope we never have to. But I think we want to talk about our native grasslands, not just in North Dakota. I think we want to talk about them everywhere, whether they're in Canada or whether they're in the U.S. Our perennial grassland acres are extremely important. They perform so many environmental issues we take for granted. And I think they've been disappearing, and we've seen this before our eyes. And I guess when I think about it, I feel that they've been going very quietly into the night and just slowly disappearing. And I think we need to lay this on the table and talk about it. And I think we need to take a look at a bigger picture within the world and just take a look at this from the viewpoint of what impacts we're having. So let's go ahead and we'll go down this road and we'll see how we do on this. Our objective, like I mentioned, is going to be to discuss the future of them. And to start with that, I just want to talk a little bit about some of the past and present civilizations. And some of the past civilizations, if we take a look at them, like the Sumerians, this was a really intelligent group of people. They made huge strides in writing and mathematics and calendars and all of those things. And they were in the area of Iran, Iraq, and they existed primarily with irrigation. But eventually, erosion and salinity eventually did them in. Now, when you degrade the soil, it's a subtle thing. It happens before your eyes. It's very subtle. And all of a sudden, you have less function and less function and less function. And so it's a subtle thing. So the Sumerians didn't disappear in one day. But eventually their food production system was less, and they had to become divided and move, and eventually they got taken over by a stronger entity. The Mayans are a bit on the same order. We probably know less about them, but we do know that they had a decentralized food production system. It was based on slash and burn. And eventually the food production started getting further and further away from the metropolitan areas. And they had a similar demise, very likely not in one day. But eventually someone stronger comes along. And then one I found really interesting was the cedars of Lebanon. And there was a very intelligent person that's talked about in the Bible that wanted to build a temple. And this king talked to another king, and they made a deal. And King Solomon sent 150,000 workers, so the data says, to harvest these cedars. And they're not there today anymore. You know, it's basically a denuded area. And so you take a look at that. That was an area a little larger than Burleigh County. You know, it was about 1.2 million acres. That's a huge impact. And like I said, the person who wanted to harvest these is thought upon as a very intelligent person. You know, he's thought upon in history as one of the great thinkers. So when you're in school and you are looking at history and in these civilizations, and you want to ask yourself always, the question I always asked myself was, why did they do that? Why would you positively do that? And of course, it's much more complex than that when a society goes down this road. Rainforests and also had a huge impact as far as the soybean production. Just taking a quick peek at that, you can see from just China's production alone, 70 through 1990 paralleled. Consumption and production pretty much paralleled each other for a long time. And then approximately in 1990 and on, they started moving up the food chain. And you get more meat in your diet, and it's a more affluent society. And so the demand for soybeans became much greater. So if we go back, kind of explains where the rainforest issues have been. Interesting comment I read about the rainforest demise was that recently you weren't able to secure a loan if you're going to be planting your soybean production on rainforested acres. So this was one of the areas where they were trying to slow this tide. And again, when you degrade a soil, it's very subtle. It's a subtle item. Anytime we go from complexity to simplicity, Anytime you go from complexity to simplicity, you're going to have this degradation. And the functionality starts to leave our soils. Well, then Argentina, I can bear witness to that personally, because we had 12 Argentinian farmers come up about a year ago and spend a day with us in Burleigh County. And we're going through a lot of our cropping and cover crops and grazing systems, and we ended the day by doing a slake and infiltration. So we had all the soils out, we're doing this slake and infiltration, and we're looking at how much quicker the water moves into a soil when it's very healthy, and how it just kind of perches on top when it's not. And they get into a big discussion amongst themselves over in a corner, and then after that discussion they come walking over and they say a really profound item. They said, "This is how our soils used to look." And Argentina used to be world renowned for how the health of their soils. Fantastic soil health. And they had high diversity in their cropping systems, and then they would move into perennial grass for a few years, and then back into the cropping, back into the grass. And so consequently they had built tremendous soil health in their soils. Now they're growing one crop each year, all of the farmers that were there, and supplying it to the graph I just showed you. So consequently they went from complexity to simplicity. Now their water is not infiltrating, they're getting more runoff, their fossil fuel input has become higher. So consequently, that soil degradation, it's kind of a gradual, subtle item. And then the last item is what's happening with this society in the Great Plains. What's happening with this civilization? Well, let's take a look at this native rangeland story. We had already talked about this particular slide, so I want to move to this one. You can pick out any one of these items that you want to, and you could basically do a day seminar on each one of these on how they impact native rangeland. Commodity prices are high at this time, yes, but we've also lost native rangeland acres when they're low. Not as many, but we still lost them. Crop insurance has been a hot topic. I don't think crop insurance was ever intended to give you leverage to reduce risk for taking out native grassland acres with no crop history. I don't think that was ever really the intent. I think it was intended to give a farmer a floor, but not to take advantage of it from the viewpoint of completely changing another land resource. Irrigation is an interesting topic. 40% of our world production is based on irrigation. And the Ogallala Aquifer, a lot of you are very familiar with it, runs from southern South Dakota to northern Texas. The people that I deal with and that farm in that area have real concerns about the future of it. And I think this is one that's going to be impacting as well. Ethanol is one that you can say is had an impact on grain prices. Ethanol that goes for grain is one item. If we start removing residues to be made into ethanol, I think that's completely another item. If we think that as a society we can start to remove the residue for ethanol, I think we're very mistaken on that. Easements. We've had easements around for a long time. Some people have taken that route. That's a personal choice. When I first started this line of work, most times when you mentioned the word easement, there was quite a hatred in the ag community for the word. I don't find that so much anymore. I find people coming in and actually asking about easements and inquiring about them. And so they play a role in this whole thing. Urban sprawl, as long as it's cheaper to build horizontally than vertically, then I think Fargo, Bismark, Minot, I think they're going to continue to go horizontal, and we'll continue to gobble up some acres. Population growth, the 9 billion, we're heading for that. And I think our next speaker, when Paul speaks, I think he's going to show that this is a very doable item. So if you have it in the back of your mind that you need to destroy perennial grassland acres to feed people, you're probably going to find out that that's quite the reverse. We have such potential on our native rangeland acres that was illustrated yesterday in the Grazing Coalition meeting. Such potential of what can be done on those, it's enormous. Sod buster and sod saver. Sod buster provision, those of you that are a little bit older in the room, remember 1985. September 23rd, 1985, legislation went into place for the 85 Food Security Act, and that's what brought in CRP, it brought in wetlands, it brought in HEL, it brought in a whole lot of things. This was going to be the answer to erosion, because we were going to get a handle on erosion now, okay? And we were going to get a handle on sod busting native acres. I'm here to tell you, after working through that farm bill, that's not what happened. For a lot of political reasons, you know, it's not what happened. Sod Saver was in the 08 Farm Bill, parts of 5 states. So Sod Saver was there, but none of the governors in those 5 states would sign, to my knowledge, would sign off on Sod Saver, so it wasn't enacted. So if you're thinking that the Farm Bill has to save perennial grass acres, native rangeland acres, I don't know that that's going to happen. It could actually be the reverse. The most difficult thing for the perennial grassland acres to deal with could be a Farm Bill. So I wouldn't lay it on the Farm Bill, my hopes. Beginning farmer rancher, these perennial acres have always been a good way to bring in new operators, young people, the future. And I think that's another item that we're really missing the boat on. And I think we need to take a look at that from that viewpoint as well. I'm going to cover 4 items fairly briefly, go through those 4 items and just see where we're at as far as giving it value. So you could have many more than this, but I broke it down to those 4. First one is a huge carbon sink. And I don't care if you believe in global warming or not, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you believe in it or not. Okay? The right thing to do is sequester this carbon. It's what drives our systems. It's what drives our cropping systems. Carbon is it's the monetary, it's the currency for the soil. Between the plant and the soil, it's the currency. Okay? So we got to have this carbon. We need the carbon in the soil. We do it for that reason. And if you happen to believe in global warming, that's your decision. But we need the carbon. The other item is diversity above and below ground. I want to illustrate that. Erosion, and the foundation of the beef industry. So we're just going to go through these, walk through these. These are from Paul's field. Paul's our next speaker. We grabbed these in October of this past year. Shows the soil organic matter. Soil organic matter, this cropland field in blue here was at 3.8. The difference between it and the field right beside it is the next field had more livestock exposure to it over the years. Okay? And it was at 5% soil organic matter. And this one is the native rangeland. The native rangeland came in at 7.2. And those of you familiar with soil organic matter, you know it's 50% carbon. That's a lot of carbon. Okay? That's a lot of carbon. Carbon plays a big role in this whole thing, and it plays a role in how our grazing systems function and the production that we get from them. If we take a look at the total biology, the phospholipid fatty acids, you can actually now get a marker. Each portion of the biology has its own unique marker. So when you send in this biology test, it can tell you how much bacteria, how much fungi, how much protozoa. It can tell you what you have. So you go to those same 3 fields, and we notice a difference in the biology amounts as well, in the total biology. Difference in the bacterial amounts. Okay? Now these are long-term no-till fields with high crop diversity and continual live plant, continual cover crop. They still haven't quite been able to match what native rangeland has put together. If you look at the fungi portion of it, the fungi portion is really interesting. The 2 cropland fields came in about identical. Look at where the native rangeland is. Now I made a note on here because when you have time, I want you to go to the soil biology tab, whether it's this evening or whenever. Go to the soil biology tab. There's an article in there from ARS and Brookings that explains why this is. And it'll help give you some clues in your operation. And when I read that article, I just couldn't wait to look at this. And this example played out exactly as the article did. So when you get the time, there's a more in-depth article for you to read on the soil biology on the fungi component. And then if you look at the big cats, think of the bacteria and think of the fungi as little bags of fertilizer. Or if you want, you can think of them as wildebeest in the jungle. And think of these protozoa as the big cats. Okay? Because they're going to devour the fungi, they're going to devour the bacteria, and they're going to create mineralization. They're going to create your nutrient flow. Okay? So there's a lot of diversity below the ground. When you take a look at the cropland and you think, yes, I've got a lot of diversity, then you start taking a look and compare it to the native rangeland. Yeah, maybe we got a little ways to go yet. This is also some diversity above the ground. And there's another article in the soil biology tab that I want you to take a look at when you get a chance. This is the amount of life that went through 1 foot cubic frame in 24 hours. This particular one was in a rainforest, this one was in a grasslands, and this one was in a cornfield. And again, when you go from complexity to simplicity, you start to lose the biological process. It's the people that do everything in the soil. They build the aggregates, they restore the water function and the nutrient. But you can look at the article in depth. It's also in there. And I thought this would be interesting to look at as well. Lewis and Clark traveled on this very spot we're sitting in today, or certainly within a few feet of it. When you read their journals, and there's several different editions out there, they recorded a lot of animal and plant diversity. No doubt. In addition to that, they described, I grabbed this September 17th one because it was south of Bismarck, somewheres maybe between Pier and Bismarck, we estimate. And it gave you a pretty good idea of what the wildlife population looked like. And then the most interesting one to me is this one right here. Within a few feet of where we're sitting right now, just on the other side of the river, we could walk over to it if the ice would hold us. Within a few feet of us, they encountered the first grizzly bear. Now, how many people who live in Bismarck think there was ever grizzly bears walking through here? But they were part of this whole food chain. So diversity above the ground, diversity below the ground. I want to touch on the erosion aspect. It's 2013 and we can't seem to get this under control. 2013, doesn't that sound odd? And we can't get this under control. This was the last big survey that was done on it. You take a look at North Dakota, we're still up there pretty high. We can't seem to grab this thing. We can get it done. We've got people in this room that have done an outstanding job on that, have completely eliminated it. And we can do this, but it isn't done now. If you want to look at it from the air, this is the San Luis Valley shot of wind erosion coming off the valley. You know it's significant when you can see it from space. This is one out of the plane's window. Was in the news just the other day, 23 vehicles collided here. One died. The really interesting thing was in the article what the surrounding landowners were asked to do because of this. Does anyone know what the surrounding farmers were asked to do? Till. They were asked to plow their land. Could you go out and plow your land to get this under control? Think about this a little bit. Let's look at the foundation a little bit. The foundation of the beef industry. This shows where we're at as of January 1. Starting in 1932, and we had our peak in the early 70s. Been a bit of a decline after that. And if you look at the operations, that's the red line, number of beef for beef operations. The last 20-some years. A bit of a decline. And now let's take a look at some world production numbers. Now think outside of your own classroom, your own desk, your own farm, your own ranch. Think beyond these borders. And these are world figures. And they're an interesting one. This one is ocean catch. On the left is millions of tons. Okay, the bottom is years. This one right here is ocean catch. And you can see we've somewhat planed out on that. We haven't had an increase in ocean catch for a while. Seems like it's running a bit stagnant. Then we've got pork, which has been a pretty steady uphill climb. Then we got poultry. Poultry started out in the metropolitan areas. It was a Sunday dinner because it was expensive. This is a long time ago now. Even just you older guys can maybe remember this. But at one time, that's the way it was in the metropolitan areas. Not so much in the farms, but in the metropolitan areas. But that changed. So poultry production started climbing. This one right here is fish in a tank, fish in a feedlot. Okay, that one's been really growing dramatically. And beef is right here, this green one. And it's starting to plane out. In fact, if you had the last year's production on there, probably would look very flat, if not somewhat down. If I can jump ahead and then come back, I never thought too much about fish in a tank, but we had a Puerto Rican student last summer in the office, and this is his backyard, where he lives in Puerto Rico. And this is fish in a tank. And he said it's all over there, with hydrophytic vegetation removing nutrients and cycling the water through. But fish right down here, fish right here. And then the big three worldwide are carp, tilapia, and catfish. And I said, how many, if you got a 200-gallon tank in the backyard, how many fish are in there? Well, he said if it's tilapia, he said 200. I said, oh, okay. That's a lot of fish. What about the water quality issues? Yeah, he said, that's a problem. Everybody's just been dumping the water. He said, that's a problem. Anytime we confine, we have to deal with that. So if we flip back, some interesting things. This is fish in a tank. Poultry is projected to catch pork in the next 20 years. And fish in a tank is projected to pass both of them worldwide. And fish in a tank has now gone past world beef production. So we wonder about those things, and we take a look at some of the conversion rates, of course. The growth rates are on the left side. This has been their growth rates. Farmed fish is growing tremendously fast worldwide. Poultry, pork, followed by beef, somewhere less than 1%. Now if you look at the conversion, farmed fish, less than 2 pounds of grain for a pound of gain. Poultry, greater than 2 pounds of grain for a pound of gain. Pork is 3 pounds, beef is somewhere around 6. You can find a lot of numbers on this, but after finding some numbers and talking to some feedlot people, this was felt as pretty close. So how do you make this herbivore competitive? He's at a disadvantage when he's in the feedlot. How do you make him competitive? You got to allow him to do what he does best. Every time we take out another piece of native rangeland, we've chipped away at the beef industry. We don't have to bring it totally to its knees, we just have to get it to the tipping point. So we got to be looking at this. CRP was kind of a missed opportunity. CRP, we had an opportunity to bring livestock onto CRP. Would have been environmentally very, very positive, would have shortened up some time in the feedlot. Maybe we could have took a month off of the feedlot, maybe 6 weeks, maybe 8 weeks. Would have been a tremendous use for CRP. Cropland integration with cover crops, untouched in this country. There's a potential there. However, it's the grasslands that are the foundation. So every time we chip away and we take a little more grassland out, we're chipping away at that beef industry as well. If we want to know what Burleigh County is doing, I'll tell you. We're looking at number here. So these are number of breaking requests Used to be about 2 or 3 a year. And they were odd things, like maybe 10 acres here, 15 acres there, in the middle of some cropland. Wasn't really an impact on anything, but that started to change. Last year we had 58 requests. That's a lot of requests to chip away at the beef industry. Acre-wise, you take a look at the acres, we were just under 5,000 this past year. Now if you take 5,000 acres and divide it by 640, that's quite a few sections of native rangeland. That'd make a pretty nice ranch. So you take a look at these, and again, it's all cases where we're going from complexity to simplicity. So as we move down this road, and this is a Burleigh County one, as we move down this road, I think we need to weigh out these consequences, and I think we have to understand what the function of our grasslands are. And I think today my goal was to get it out on the table. But remember, degrading a soil is very subtle. When this group in Burleigh County moved out of our tillage systems into our no-till systems and added crop diversity, you know, most people told us it wouldn't work. And then as we moved into our grazing systems and we started integrating livestock onto the cover crops, this is going back toward complexity. This restores the functionality in the soil. But it's a subtle thing, and if it happens long enough, you create a whole generation that's never seen it different and becomes normalized. So it's up to us. I didn't bring any magic bullet today. I wanted to get it on the table so we don't miss the opportunity to discuss it. We don't miss the opportunity to react and actually do something for it. I think it's important to speak for the resource. And that was my primary intent today. If we could bring the lights up a bit. It was the intent of this discussion was to bring it to that point. And awareness. Let's talk about it. So I have one closing request for you. At dinner today, when you're at your table and they're serving you, I want you to talk about native rangeland. It's going to be awkward. It's going to be so awkward. But just throw it on the table and talk, if you would.